Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is a video to welcome and introduce the Divine Person Week of Rebecoming the One 2023. And I am here today with my co-facilitator of this third week, Jonathan Coe. And I'm so happy, so excited. This week is really switching gears in a lot of ways from the first half of the symposium, which is now over, but still available, still engaged with it indefinitely. So in this video, I want to introduce Jonathan to you, and then Jonathan and I are going to have a little bit of a conversation. We were just talking before we started recording, and I think we have some really important things that need to be voiced and need to be said in this video. And then we're gonna drop into the brief logistics of what this week is going to look like, which is again parallels the first 2 weeks, but we'll give you a little more detail about how that's all going to work. So first, Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you, Martha, and thank you everyone for this space. And I have just really enjoyed being in your space, Martha, and kind of collaborating with you on this week. And yeah, I'm really excited to see what comes forth.
Yay. Yeah, so I asked Jonathan to be a part of this for many reasons. But we first met a little over a year ago because you were a speaker in Rebecoming the One the first time. And you're a really good friend of Verena Burrell, who is a really good friend of mine. So she introduced us, which was amazing. And then when we first connected, we realized how many overlaps we have astrologically in terms of the way we grew up globally. Just lots and lots of things.
Yes.
It was pretty awesome. It was like instantaneous, boom, I know you. Yeah.
Exactly. That's how I felt too.
Yeah. And another few, I mean, again, there's so many reasons I don't know if I can name all of them here, but I'll just name another couple of them, which is I love the way you interview. I love the way, more than that, I love the way you listen. Like you have interviewed me last year after the symposium for your podcast, which and I've witnessed you interviewing other people. I've witnessed you or I've experienced you just listening to me in general personal conversations. And I love the intentionality you bring and the thoughtfulness and the genuine caring and the love. And I love how you can go very slowly with your listening. You know, this, I'm sure you're not always slow, but I'm just saying, like, at least in this setting, the way that you tend to be present feels to me very slow, and like you're listening on such incredibly deep levels. And you're a musician too, which I find really interesting, right? Like I can feel how you listen with like many capacities. There's so much going on when you're taking in information. It's like I can feel you listening through, I don't know, whole worlds or something. And it's really
Wow.
beautiful to be on the receiving end of that listening, and then also yeah, to just be present with you as you're listening to somebody else, and then therefore having a dialogue that's coming from that place of real listening is really a gift.
Thank you, Martha. I received that and I feel so seen through that reflection. I really appreciate that. I feel it's just been one of the things that bring me a lot of joy is to listen to people and to find places where we meet and to find places where we don't meet, because I think a core I wouldn't even say principle, but maybe a core energetics of my work is in really working through how we are separate and how we are also deeply interconnected with one another, and really finding healing in the spaces in between. I don't really believe anymore that healing is individual work. I believe that healing happens in the space in between. I think healing happens in um, the web of life that we're all connected to. I think healing happens in relationship.
Mhm.
And I think in healing through connecting in relationships, we really, and I'm not just talking about relationships between two humans. I'm not just talking about relationships that happen when we are in the same time and space and dimension. I'm talking about all the multidimensionality of that relation. But I really feel like this is healing work to me is not one that can be done alone. I think
Mhm.
it's impossible to do individual healing work. So I really appreciate you naming that, because I do think that yes, as a musician, I definitely find myself in a position where I'm used to listening. And I think also what I have found is that in listening, I found myself too, you know, because I'm not separate from the other person. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Mhm.
Yeah, and just a couple other things about you, factual things, so people have a little more orientation to who you are on a certain level. So Jonathan also is an astrologer, and you do have your own podcast. We did an interview together for this week where
Yes.
where I interviewed you and I read your whole bio and all of that. But
Mhm.
uh, yeah, there's lots more to say about who you are, and yeah. So as we are entering this week of the divine person, just really briefly, I want to realize I want to explain what I mean, like what I meant when I structured this year's symposium. I added this category of the divine person, and I want to explain where that came from, which is last year, actually, in the divine masculine panel discussion, a really close childhood friend of mine was attending. And
Mm.
she asked an amazing question, which was, um, why don't you talk about, like, you have divine feminine, you have divine masculine, where's the divine person? Like, why isn't there a
Mm.
category of the divine person? That was such a good question. All right. Especially because I know she is queer identified, and
Mm.
most of her community, I'd say, is, in terms of gender identity, mostly in the gender fluid or non-binary world.
Yeah.
Not entirely, but I think that's really important. That's a huge value for her, is to be seen in that area of life. Okay. So it really got me thinking, and I pretty immediately was like, yes, that should be yes, that should be a thing.
Mhm.
And that is a thing, so it should be named. Or I don't know, somehow it needs to be for front and center just as much as divine feminine and divine masculine. So that's what I mean when I say divine person, is this something along the lines of, there's this reality of the duality of gender, and then there's this reality also of the non-binary, gender fluidity, um, the reality that there are so infinite ways to think about gender, that there's not even, I mean, some people think of it as a spectrum, other people think of it as anything or nothing, or just, there needs to be room for conversations around gender that are not just about the polarities. Whatever else
Mhm.
is here needs to be here.
Mhm.
So that's what this week to me was really, that's my intention for this week, is to really give space for something other than the polarity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to also really consciously and deliberately give space for queer identified voices, and perspectives and needs, and lots and lots and lots there too.
Yeah.
Uh, I have the intention to be holding space for all of that in the entire symposium, but I
Mhm.
wanted a space where there was very clearly and deliberately a space for it.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me. I think that, so I'm just going to kind of speak from the heart and share with you what's been coming up for me, Martha, which is that,
Yeah.
some a conversation that's been really alive for me in my field with the people I've been having conversations with colleagues, friends, students, clients, is this idea of systems in general, and how even when we talk about the divine feminine versus the divine masculine, that is really a system, right? That is a one way, one ontology into which we peer into our reality, right? The reality is, I think we can all safely say, especially as people who are interested in unseen dimensions, right, that we are really in this world. There's just so much layers to it. There's so much subtlety to it that I think to clump anything into 2 or 3 or 12 or 100 categories is actually maybe not even a fair assessment, but I think here's where I'm realizing that we have kind of become a little bit detached from the heart of a lot of the wisdom teachings. We live in a world where we are so used to um, being subjected to, on a systemic level, like white supremacist values. We're so used to being subjected to um, heteronormative values. We're so used to being oppressed, right, through religion and in our own relationship to our spirituality, that we don't even question it. And I think the deconditioning process is a multi-layer thing, right? You always find new layers of like, oh, I can actually get rid of this layer, right? This layer is not really mine. This layer is not really a reflection of the truth. And so the reason why I brought all of this up is because to me, the real point, and this is just from my own personal experience and the experience of people that I work with, I think the reason why we would want to talk about the masculine, and the feminine, right, is because they provide a window, they provide a framework, a template into which we can then more deeply engage with the complexity of reality, right?
Mm.
But simultaneously, this division has also been used as a tool for violence, a tool for um, re reinforcing power structures that don't really serve anyone ultimately in the end, right? Seemingly it serves certain kinds of people and not others, but I think in reality it just doesn't serve anyone, right? We can safely say. So I feel that for me, the divine person also has to do with like, how do we be with the complexity of gender expression? How do we be with the complexity of sexuality? How do we be with the complexity of our humanity? Think about this, right? Even if you are a straight, cis, hetero woman, the way that you express your sexuality is going to be very different from your birth sister, grew up in the same home, right? Who has the same labels, right? But ultimately, the expression of it will be very different. So I think, to me, working with these systems always has to be first and foremost accompanied with an understanding and a willingness to engage with the complexity. Systems are only helpful. It's like both of us are astrologers. We know this, right? Like that system is simply a window into which we fall into a deeper engagement of our reality. So I think, in a sense, queerness to me is similar in that queerness is an embracing of the mystery, right? You and I were just speaking about the idea of labels, and are labels even important? And I think labels are important and labels are not, right? Systems are important and systems are not. My individuality is absolutely an integral part of who I am, and it's also an illusion, right? And it's like, how do we be with the complexity of all that is? And I don't think this is about finding answers. This is where a lot of our Western thinking, a lot of our indoctrination of supremacist values have really failed us, because this is not about being, This is not about finding the answer. This is not about getting to the right path. We make the path as we go, right? And so if we make the path as we go, each thought that we are thinking, right? Each action that we are taking, each word that we are saying is what builds that new path. Like when we're talking about like the new earth, the new world, it's being created every second, you know? But to our human minds, this is too extreme. This is too much, right? Like we can't possibly understand that. So I think when I think about the divine person, to me, it is about how do we live beyond the prescriptions that have been imposed upon us by society? How do we live according to our spiritual navigation system in a way that doesn't bypass the challenges that are present in our reality and the oppressive systems that we have had to live through, but instead embrace that that is also part of coming into our wholeness, right? And I think my experience being a queer person, being a person who identifies as being non-binary, is that the true expression of my queerness is when I am standing in the midst of a pride celebration and I feel so much, and the only way that I can be true to my experience is just to let my tears flow.
Mm.
That to me is the heart of my queerness. The heart of my queerness has nothing to do maybe even with like who I identify with or the words that I use for my sexuality, but it's really that experience of seeing that I can express myself exactly as I am at this moment and be celebrated for that and be allowed and have space for that. And again, you and I were talking about labels, and I do think that labels are important because we still work in a society that is our society primarily values the thinking mind, right? And so I think that becomes a portal for us, and a portal from which we come into, to me, is very important, because that portal probably speaks to the intentionality of what's on the other side. But I think one contemplation around the divine person that I would like to invite everyone into is that as you peer into the complexity of who you are, my hope is that you become less afraid of the complexity that you see in other people.
Mm.
Because so much of, I think, why we have such an oppressive society is because we are so afraid. We don't have the capacity to be with our own complexity, that we
Mm-mm.
feel the need to attack another person's complexity.
Mm.
We feel the need to be in sameness because not being in sameness feels unsafe to our system. So to me, the questions in this week has to do with how do you on a spirit level invite yourself into deeper engagement with your complexity, which in turn will help your system on a physical body level, on a nervous system level, on an aura level, be with the complexity of yourself. And therefore, because we are fractal and the universe is fractal, you being with your complexity is going to help you embrace the complexity of the world, embrace the complexity of the human and the non-human world, embrace the complexity of various expressions of gender and sexuality.
Beautiful. I'm thinking two things are really front and center in my mind as you're talking. And one of them, I'm not completely sure why I'm feeling the need to name this, but I guess I am, so I will. Um, the other one is very simple. I'll get to that in one second. But what I'm seeing in my mind's eye as you're talking is you're talking about being in Pride, being in the Pride Festival recently this weekend, and feeling like you could just let your tears flow. As you're saying that, I was remembering being back in the moment of 2 years ago, one of the most beautiful relationships I've had in my entire life, which I don't tend to talk about a lot publicly, but feels really important too, was with a transgender woman.
Mm.
And we spent some time together in a very liberal town. I mean, very, very, very extremely queer friendly town. And even though it was exceedingly, as these things go, incredibly queer friendly, my immediate reaction just walking around with her in that town was consistently, constantly, I felt like I needed to protect her. Like I needed to be her barrier to the world,
Mhm.
especially with men, right? Because she would get hit on a lot by men. And I felt scared for her almost constantly. And I loved her very deeply. So for whatever reason that's coming up as you're talking,
Mm.
and maybe what I'm feeling the need to name is how incredibly real the fear is.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it's terror. Like it's not just fear, it's like life and death terror,
Yeah.
constantly, always, all the time.
Mhm.
um like I could just start crying thinking about that. I mean, I still love her very, very much, right? So uh yeah, anyway. For
Yeah.
whatever reason, that needed to come out.
Mhm. Mhm. Thank you for sharing that, Martha. Yeah. Is it okay if I respond to that?
Oh, of course, yes.
Yeah. I think, it's also worth naming that at the time that we're recording this, right? Um, I can't remember. Let me put it this way. Of course, I can't remember, but I feel that we are noticing a rise in anti-trans sentiments,
Yes.
anti-trans legislation, and we are also seeing a lot of fear in the collective around conversations about transness or about even um, you know drag queens, right? Or um, gender expressions that don't solidly belong in the categories we've created of like, this is what a man looks like and this is what a woman looks like. I want to name that that's really present. People are
Mm.
really afraid. And I think that this is something that we need to really sit with, right? I don't have an answer, but I do think that consider the possibility that I, I just want to speak from my own queer perspective and from my communities, where a lot of my friends who identify as gay men also are in a deep moment of working through their own transphobia and their own misogyny.
Yes.
And this to me is really alive for a lot of us. And if we are to create a different reality, we need to befriend these parts of us, right?
Mm.
Again, I want to go back to this idea of the universe as fractal because I don't think this is trivial. And I think this is where spiritual lineages and wisdom traditions have really helped us for millennia to come to this point now. Because this understanding that the universe is fractal, right? One way to understand it is that, a strand of our hair contains the entirety of our DNA sequence, right? How can I curse?
Yes, go for
How fucking bonkers is that? Like
it.
it's just so fucking bonkers. And so I think really realizing that you are the universe and the universe is you, you are the earth is you. We are not separate. And so whatever it is that we are fearing in our trans brothers and sisters and siblings is what we fear within ourselves. What we try to suppress, what we try to eradicate in others is what we try to eradicate within ourselves, right? And so I really appreciate you sharing that, Martha, because I think that this piece around safety is so real. And it's something that we are working with on a physical body level. We're working with this on a cellular level. And I think this is why it's so hard, right? When people are talking about why is it so hard? Like, I think I'm a good person, but I can't seem to accept my trans friend, or I can't seem to create a welcoming space for my gay kids. The reason why that is because if you are unable to hold that safe space, it's because you haven't held that space for yourself, and you haven't held that safe space. You haven't had that modeled for you, right? The other day I had this experience of, my partner is currently very into pet sitting recently, some of it paid, some of it unpaid. And I had this moment of like really judging him for it, and I had this moment of like, thinking like, oh, are you going to turn this into your career? Where is this going to go? And I realized in the shower that that's the lens through which I approach my partner, because that's the lens through which I grew up. I grew up with every single one of my interests being scrutinized, every part of my identity being scrutinized and asked, what's the point of you doing this or liking this or being this way? Sometimes there is just no point. And sometimes the point is to hold space for these parts of us that seem to have um, no point to them, right? But it's like I think the biggest teacher is nature, because in nature we see fishes that change genders throughout their lives, right? Depending on their needs. We see species. We see trees that to our human sensibility looks deformed, right? But actually is simply making space for different ways of being, making space for their own survival and the survival of their ecosystem, right? So I think, to me, a lot of this question around safety is again very fractal, right? And it again speaks to what are some of the ways in which we have created mental frameworks and societal frameworks around what safety looks like and what safety doesn't look like. And it's really how ironic and how fascinating, Martha, that the ways that we've tried to create safety, right? Like, for example, a lot of, you and I were just talking about, um, you know, how people feel like, some people feel, and I really have full empathy and compassion for this. Some people feel that, educating kids around transness from early on is dangerous, right? Or is inappropriate. My question is, when we're talking about safety, when we're talking about appropriate or not appropriate, who are we protecting
Yeah,
and what are we protecting them from, right?
exactly.
And what about those kids who do feel that transness from a very young age and need to express that and need to have that be affirmed?
Yeah.
When we don't have the language for things, we are working in the dark, right? In astrology, we then work in the 12th house and in the 8th house. And that is such a lonely place compared to places where things can be seen, right? Places where things can be named. And I think in giving ourselves space to even name the mutative qualities within us, the ways that we are all kind of in transition, and the fear that we hold around not knowing, I think that befriending the part of us that is scared that we don't know is the first step to actually creating an inclusive world, and a world that is, and when I'm talking about the world, I really mean like humans, right? Humans who can hold the complexity of one another.
Yeah. um and and this, we could go on for hours about all of this.
Yeah.
but I feel the need to name one more, add on something to what you just said, which is, for example, yes, actually two things. So just to back up a little bit. So I personally identify as pansexual, right? So my sexual orientation is something other than heterosexual. My gender identity is more cisgender-ish. But so I identify with the needs of the queer community personally for me, I mean, in my own self, but I would say even more in my face at the moment is the reality that I both have this experience of being very deeply in love with somebody who's transgender, and also now my oldest child has come out as transgender. So those are the two people in my world who I really deeply love, probably the most, whose eyes I see these needs through, in a sense, right? And then to a certain extent my own self because of the sexual orientation part. But but just to add to your point about who are we protecting and whose needs are we actually trying to meet, I'll give an example just for people to hear this in case it's helpful. For example, my 16-year-old, just recently came out as transgender and had been identifying as non-binary before that. And just recently wanted to tell all the grandparents about this. So my kid's dad, who's, I would say equal to me in support of our child's needs. I mean, great, he's a great dad. There's nothing wrong with him at all. Great. He, when he was about to tell his parents about the 16-year-old being transgender, he said, maybe we could ask our child, maybe the grandparents don't really need to call them by the new name. Maybe they could just XYZ thing, right? And I said, no. The answer to that is no, because guess what? Here are the pros and cons of for each person involved. Okay, for the grandparents, the con. Actually, I'll just compare the cons. The con of needing to switch names and gender and pronouns for our child is they will feel uncomfortable. It will be maybe difficult for them to remember, and they won't like it. Okay, the potential con for our child is they could have exceedingly difficult emotional challenges. They could even become suicidal. So kids who are, as we know, I'm stating to you the obvious, but just for people who don't know, one of the biggest realities for kids who are people who are queer identified, but especially transgender, is they can become suicidal very, very easily. And I don't necessarily particularly worry about that with my own kid, just because we're in an incredibly supportive place in the world and they have supportive parents and all that. But it is my ultimate fear, right? So there is no way I'm going to let the grandparents have their need to be more comfortable trump my child's need to stay alive. Like, period, the end. My mama bear was like, that is not happening. And my kid's dad immediately was like, you're right. So, he was great about it, but it is a clear and definite line, like, who are we protecting? We need to be protecting the people who are actually in danger. And I would call discomfort not a danger. That's not a danger. It's not. It's discomfort.
Exactly. Yeah. As you were speaking, Martha, what came up for me is, to remind all of us that discomfort is not a barrier to love. Your comfort is not a prerequisite to you loving a person. You can love a person and be highly uncomfortable with who they are, highly uncomfortable with how they live their lives, and you can still love them.
Yeah.
And you can still affirm them. And one of the most beautiful things that a friend of mine has once said to me was, I don't understand you. I've never been you, but I love you. And I see it.
Oh,
And
oh.
that, I think, is, to me, this is the point, right? Why the fuck else do we have a spiritual life? Because in us having a spiritual life, we get to practice what it's like to experience love, to experience devotion, to experience warmth without understanding.
Mm.
I don't understand half the things that my guides tell me.
No.
I
Same.
love them, and I see that they love me. And it's like I can feel being embraced by the universe. And I don't understand the universe.
Oh no.
I think the universe understands me, but I don't know that for a fact. Like my brain doesn't know that. So I think, again, we are in a very transitional period, I think, in our humanity. And we have an option. We have an option. People can look back at us and say, wow, like that generation really pushed the bar forward. We really pushed the needle. Or they can look at us and say, what a missed opportunity, right? Yeah.
Yes. I feel like we should come to a wrapping this up, even though, like, really truly this well, this is the beginning of a whole week of
Yeah.
talking about this thing. So I was about to say we
Yes.
could go on for a very long time, but we're about to. So that's the good news. Um, um, the one thing I was going to mention earlier, and I'll just very very briefly say it, which I find fascinating, and I said this to you before we started recording, is that when I put out this video and I put up all the videos for this coming week, will be within hours after the exact new moon in Gemini, which is fascinating to me.
There you go. I love that.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
diversity, uh, multiplicity of reality. Any other words you want to throw in
Trickster.
there? What'd you say?
Trickster.
Trickster, that too. Yeah. Um,
Yes.
and I think the other thing I'm feeling a need to say is that, there's no one right way to have this conversation too, right? So
Mhm.
as we're going into this week, I really want to emphasize for people, if there are things that we just said, that either of us said or both of us said, that don't quite sit right, or you're not sure, or you realize you have a different perspective, or whatever it is, that's okay, and that's welcome. Anything that is said with respect and honor and love and genuine desire to hear other perspectives is welcome here, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you don't need to agree with us, and we
Mhm.
don't need to agree with each other either. That's okay. I mean,
Yeah.
I think in a
Exactly.
lot of ways we do, but I want to know, for example, if Jonathan feels like I'm not quite seeing some side of something. I really, really, truly want to know that, because I am not done with my learning. That is for sure. My child teaches me that all the time. Yeah, constant.
Yeah.
So I just want to name that, like
Mhm.
that we're here to be loved and to love each other and to be present
Yeah.
in this conversation together. What were you
Yeah.
about to say?
Thank you, Martha. I really appreciate that. And I will also say, I guess a lot of the labels that I can comfortably attach to myself would put me as like the insider of like queer communities. And I'm also still learning all the time, and I think one of the things that has really helped me in learning is to trust that I don't need to know everything. Like
Mm.
so what? So what if I don't know things?
Gemini
It's
again. Beginner's
Gemini.
mind. Beginner's mind. Yeah.
I actually, my moon in Gemini consistently teaches me this, that it's actually so much safer to not know things, because
Mhm.
then you can be curious and you can actually find out the emergent truth, right? Meaning the moment to moment truth, rather than attaching to some prior assumption about something. If you don't know, ask the question and let yourself be seen in that vulnerability of not knowing. And I think another thing I will just a minor thing I will throw into the cauldron is if anything that is spoken this week or anything that Martha and I were just talking about is stirring something up within you, what I will say is, first of all, my invitation is for you to really sit with what is being stirred up, like give yourself that space. I think we really have not been acculturated within our society to sit with our discomfort, especially if you are listening and you are in the United States. Like, we are so afraid of being uncomfortable in this country, in this society. Sit with that discomfort. And I like to, as someone who finds it very hard to work with my own emotion, I've actually kind of had to create a procedure around this. And my procedure is, step number one, I ask myself, am I angry? Step number two, I ask myself, am I sad? And step number three, I ask myself, what do I not know? And just sitting with that and letting myself be a safe space for myself as these things are arising is already like giving me so much, right? And then from that point, asking myself, like, what do I need at this moment? And often the answers are really simple, because the reality is I think one of the sad truths and the joyful truth of our humanity is that we are also human. We're also animals. Humans are animals too. And often what I need is I just need to take a little break. I need to smell the flowers. I need to talk to a good friend on the phone. I need to take a nap, right? Like, it's really not very sophisticated. We like to make things very complex, and I think there's a time and place for that. And sometimes the needs of our bodies and our systems are very, very simple. So I would say really give yourself, as you are moving through the talks this week, give yourself a lot of space to really kind of sit with whatever is coming up for you. And something I'm slowly learning from, someone that I really consider one of my teachers, Sophie Strand, is this idea that we are all culpable, right? That we are not separate from one another. And that me as a queer person, as someone who identifies as being non-binary, is, what if I am also culpable in the creation of anti-trans culture? On the one hand, this is really difficult because the first thing that we have been taught is that we are taught to hate ourselves, right? But I think it's also really liberating, because if we are culpable, then we also have the power to change things. And this is where this empowerment and agency and the whole Plutonic thing in astrology really comes into play, right? Where we feel the most disempowerment is also probably where we have the most agency. And so I would just say, like, really take care of yourself, as you are moving through this week. And also, I think just the whole symposium, because it brings up a lot, brought up a lot for me personally.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we're all doing the work here. And I think I really bow to all of you listening, especially if you make it this far. And I bow to you as well, Martha, for creating this. It's really a powerful vessel for us all to be doing this work. Thank you.
Well, I bow to you for being part of it, for being here, for co-facilitating this week, for being present and honest and genuine in who you are and willing to say courageous things. And yeah.
Thank you.
Wonderful. So is it okay if I move on briefly to the logistics?
Yes, let's do
Okay,
it.
awesome. Okay, so this video and all the free videos are being released on Sunday of this week. They're available indefinitely, right? So I would say, again, just like with all the other weeks, take your time, just go to the videos that call to you when they call to you. I think your body, your spirit, your being will know which ones are right for you in each moment. You don't even have to watch the whole thing. Go to the middle and watch 20 minutes, whatever calls to you. Use it almost like a like, angel cards or something. Like, let it all, like, with a moment that your soul is needing, just go to that, whatever that is. And it might mean binge watching all of it in a row. It might mean anything. Just, it's beautiful. Whatever feels right for you is great. And then on Wednesday, we have, again, 2 sharing circles live. They're not, those are the only things in the whole symposium that are not recorded. So there's one at 10 a.m. Pacific, one at 6 p.m. Pacific, and those are available for anybody who has bought anything paid in this symposium, or if you're part of my monthly membership, the Infinite Soul Wisdom membership, or if you even just give a donation of $10 for the whole month. So those Wednesdays sharing circles and then the paid workshops on Fridays, so those are the only 2 things in the whole symposium that are paid. These free talks are entirely free and available indefinitely. And then on Thursday, Jonathan and I are going to co-facilitate a live free panel discussion with several of the speakers from this week's talks. And I already can feel that's going to be really beautiful and like probably passionate. I cannot wait for that. And we would love to have you there live, because we would love to have you there live, but also really would love to have you involved in asking questions, or saying what's alive for you. And we want it to be an interactive experience. So please be there live if you can. I will send out the Zoom link and put the Zoom link. I'll also put the Zoom link in the Teachable site. And then on Friday, there are 3 optional paid workshops, which each are sliding scale of $25 to $45 if you just want to come to one of them, or you can, just like with everything else, all the other weeks, you can buy the all-in-one bundle and have all 14 paid workshops and healing sessions all in one, again, sliding scale price starting at $125, which is like less than $10 per workshop. So it's exceedingly, I was trying to be very, very, very accessible for as many people as possible. And so please join us for that if that calls to you. And that's a great way also just to support this work if you're able to. And if you're not able to, I completely understand that as well. But if you are able to and you feel called to, we would really appreciate it, because this has been a lot of work for sure. And I think that's it in terms of logistics. Is there anything on your mind about that, Jonathan?
No, I don't think so. I think you covered it all.
Great. Yeah. And then next week will be the last week of the symposium, where we're going to bring it all together, become the one. But I'm really, really, really excited to drop into this Divine Person Week, and I can already feel change, transformation, healing that's already moving. And yeah, wonderful.
Excited too. Thank you, Martha.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
See you all very soon.